Before we begin, imagine stepping back in time to an America not yet fully born. 13 young colonies straining beneath the shadow of a distant king. Wars are whispered in taverns, thundered across battlefields, and plotted in candlelit rooms. Within these uncertain days, a quiet revolution unfolds in a modest Philadelphia workshop. There, a seamstress by the name of Betsy Ross sits bent over a table, needle in hand, guided by a dream of unity and freedom. At her side works an apprentice, Mary Fletcher, whose voice we have never heard until now. Tonight, we share a story told through the newly uncovered pages of Mary's secret diary, a witness to one of America's most cherished legends, the birth of its first official flag. These words, carried through centuries, illuminate the humble origins of a symbol that would one day represent a nation's highest ideals. So settle in, and let us journey together into a world of candlelight and whispered conversations, where simple threads of red, white, and blue were woven into something far greater than cloth, an enduring emblem of hope.
I have often wondered who might someday read these words, if anyone at all. I write them now in the quiet hush of early dawn, in the year of our Lord 1777, by the flickering light of a single tallow candle. My name is Mary Fletcher. I am but a modest seamstress's helper in Philadelphia, apprentice to a woman whose name, in some distant century, may still linger on the tongues of free Americans. Her name is Mrs. Elizabeth Betsy Ross. I do not know if the future will remember her as I do, the gentle tilt of her head, the determined set of her mouth, the graceful movement of her needle as it passes through broadcloth and linen. I know only what I have seen, what I have sown, and what I have dared to hope for in a time of upheaval. As I write, I am tired and my hands tremble not from the chill of winter, but from the weight of what we have undertaken. In the streets, people talk of revolution, of battles fought and lost and bravely won, of a fragile and perhaps fleeting alliance between 13 proud colonies. But inside the small parlor of Betsy Ross's upholstery and seamstress shop, we carry a quieter dream, the stitching of a new standard that might one day represent a nation yet unformed. Before I began these entries, I was never so grand as to imagine that my words might survive into a distant age. And yet, what we have done feels significant. You see, word has come that General George Washington himself, yes, that man whose name sparks a hush of reverence, commissioned Betsy Ross to sew a new flag for the unified colonies. I dare not claim I know his reasons. Rumors say he desired a single banner under which all his men might rally, a symbol that would transform disparate militias and rebellious farmers into something more enduring, an American people. But I should start at the beginning, how I came to assist Mrs. Ross, and what strange circumstances led me into the presence of great men and the forging of a new emblem. Perhaps, by recording all I remember, I can lend shape to the myth that may one day overshadow these humble facts. I began my apprenticeship with Betsy Ross some months after my family fled our small farm near the Delaware River, seeking refuge in Philadelphia. My mother thought it prudent for me to learn a trade. After all, the times were uncertain, and every young woman should know some craft to keep food on the table. Betsy's shop, neatly tucked away down a narrow street off Arch, was recommended by a distant cousin who knew her well. I was greeted with warmth, the scent of fresh linen, and that quiet, purposeful energy that comes when thread is drawn through fabric. Betsy was both kind and firm, an ideal mentor. She took me on, despite my clumsy first attempts at hemming and stitching, and soon I learned that patience, precision, and steady breath were the keys to good needlework. We spent our days mending uniforms for officers, fashioning table linens for wealthier families, and occasionally making flags, though at the time, these flags were often simple standards for naval use or perhaps a simple emblem to mark a regiment's encampment. I never dreamed that one day we might be entrusted with something more symbolic. The talk of revolution was on everyone's lips then. The city buzzed with news of skirmishes and declarations. We heard muffled accounts, Lexington and Concord's shot heard round the world, the signing of the Declaration of Independence just last year, and the steady drum of war. Yet, as a young woman of about 19, I listened to these grand events like distant thunder. My world was threaded linen and careful stitches, not the battlefield. I cannot say I understood all the implications. I knew only that my father and brothers supported independence wholeheartedly, and that my mother prayed every evening for the men who stood their ground against the redcoats. It was in the late winter of this year, 1777, that I first noticed Betsy's demeanor change. She had been visited by gentlemen, stern, thoughtful men whose eyes weighed the quality of our work and the measure of our loyalty. I recall one afternoon, sitting by the window with a length of red wool draped across my lap, when Betsy's doorbell chimed. She ushered me into the back room and said, "Mary, dear, could you fetch a fresh pot of tea?" Her voice was tight, and I sensed the importance of the visitor. I waited quietly in the shadows, just beyond the doorframe, as voices drifted through the still air. I recognized at least one, Colonel George Ross, an uncle of her late husband, if I recall correctly. The others spoke quietly, the timbre of their words lost to me, but I caught fragments: a new standard, unifying the colonies, 13 stripes, one for each colony. Their tone was hushed and urgent, as if this project carried the weight of an entire army's morale. When I emerged with the tea, my heart fluttered. Betsy's eyes met mine with a spark of confidence and caution. The men were polite, yet reserved. One of them asked to see samples of our cloth. Another pointed to the scraps of red and white striped material in a basket by the window. The third, though I could not see him well, asked about the possibility of arranging stars in a circle rather than rows. Betsy nodded, ever composed, and said we would do our best to accommodate the design. By the time they left, I knew something monumental had transpired, though I did not know its full shape. In the following days, Betsy confided in me that General Washington himself had been involved in these discussions. She spoke of him quietly, reverently, as if uttering the name of a saint. He was tall, dignified, and determined, she said. He believed that the 13 colonies should have a flag that represented their unity, a pattern of stripes and stars unlike any other banner. Betsy, ever the ingenious seamstress, suggested that the 6-pointed stars they had originally drawn could be made into 5-pointed stars with a single snip of the scissors, thereby simplifying the work. This detail, she said, impressed the gentlemen. Our days soon filled with the careful cutting and sewing of a design that might become the first official American flag. I recall how carefully Betsy handled the cloth, red for courage, white for purity, and blue for vigilance and justice, though these symbolic meanings were only whispered. For me, the colors were still just fabric, and the 5-pointed stars were a challenge to align perfectly. Betsy showed me how to fold the cloth to get a perfect star shape with a clever, swift cut. I practiced for hours to ensure my work would be flawless. In truth, I was both frightened and exhilarated. If this new standard was accepted, what would that mean for us? We were not statesmen or generals, merely artisans. Yet, by crafting this flag, we were weaving ourselves into the story of a nation's birth. I considered the risk. If the British discovered what we were about, who knew what might befall us? Spies and sympathizers lurked everywhere. Still, Betsy carried herself with calm resolve, and I followed suit. Late at night, after Betsy had retired and the streets fell quiet, would record my impressions in this diary. I tried to capture every detail: the texture of the wool bunting, the angle of Betsy's shoulders as she bent over her work, the anxious whispers of men who came to check our progress. I knew that if we succeeded, this might become a moment worth remembering. And if we failed, well, at least the truth would live in these pages. As we cut stripes of red and white cloth, we spoke in hushed tones about what this flag would mean. Could 13 disparate colonies truly unite under one banner? Betsy believed so. She said that people need symbols, something to look upon and feel a sense of belonging. The British had their Union Jack, a known, revered icon. We needed something of our own to kindle pride and determination. I recall her telling me, "Mary, a free people must have a free symbol. This banner will speak where words cannot." I shall never forget the fire in her eyes when she said this. Days turned into weeks. The project advanced. We measured and remeasured every dimension. The stripes had to be of equal width, the canton a perfect rectangle of deep blue against which the stars would shine. Betsy insisted on impeccable craftsmanship. She even had me prick my fingers on hidden pins to test if I could remain steady. I admit, I admired her perfectionism. She was forging not just cloth, but something more enduring. I remember the day we finished the first complete prototype of the flag. It was a cloudy afternoon, the light dim through the front window. Betsy and I spread the flag across the work table, smoothing the fabric lovingly. 13 stripes, 7 red, 6 white, symbolizing the original colonies. A field of blue at the canton's corner, holding a circle of 13 stars, each carefully cut and stitched. We stood side by side, marveling at our creation. I felt tears prick my eyes, though I could not say exactly why. Perhaps I sensed the gravity of the moment. Not long after, the same gentleman returned. This time, I recognized Francis Hopkinson by name. Later I would learn that he too laid claim to the design. I also recognized the quiet authority of General Washington, though he attempted to keep his presence discreet. Betsy presented the flag, and for a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Washington, with a measured nod, expressed his approval. Hopkinson examined the stars and stripes closely, as if judging both artistry and meaning. The men seemed pleased, though formal. They did not linger, and soon the workshop was quiet again, but with a silence filled with possibility. After they left, Betsy and I embraced. The flag was in their hands now. Our role had been played. It was a strange feeling, to pour heart and skill into something only to watch it carried away, fated for camps and battlefields, for parades and declarations, or for some unknown destiny. I looked around our small workshop with new eyes. Here, in this unassuming room, something important had happened, something that might outlast all of us. In the weeks that followed, rumors spread. People spoke of a new American flag, a standard to represent the independence of the colonies. I heard whispers that Congress had adopted a resolution recognizing a flag of 13 stripes and 13 stars. Betsy said nothing publicly. She went about her business, making uniforms and mending sails, as though the world hadn't just shifted. But in private, over a cup of tea, she smiled like a woman who held a secret in her heart, a secret stitched into the fabric of history. As for me, I became increasingly aware of the myth that might form around this moment. Betsy's name might become legend, the woman who stitched the first American flag. It felt romantic and grand, and yet I knew there were others involved, men who proposed designs, who sketched out ideas, who might later claim credit. I also knew that some details might fade or bend in the telling. Perhaps no one would believe how a quick snip of Betsy's scissors persuaded men to choose a 5-pointed star. Perhaps history would simplify the story into a neat anecdote, forgetting the late nights, the pricked fingers, the quiet terror that our work might be discovered by enemies. I asked Betsy once if she worried how history would remember her. She laughed, gently, and said, "Mary, we do what we must today. Let the future weave its own tale." She was wise, I think, to trust that what would matter in the end is that a symbol was born. Who receives credit may be less important than the fact that the flag exists at all. There was also the question of what that flag symbolized. 13 stripes for 13 colonies, this much was certain. But the stars? We placed them in a circle, equal in size, to represent the unity of the states. A circle has no beginning and no end, Betsy said, suggesting the eternal nature of their bond. Yet who could know if the colonies would truly remain united, or if the bright future we imagined would ever fully bloom? Even so, the flag was a beacon of hope, a banner under which ordinary men and women could stand and feel part of something larger than themselves. It was an emblem of aspiration, not yet reality. As the war raged on, we heard more news: battles at Saratoga, winter at Valley Forge, and the slow, grinding effort to secure independence. Soldiers marched under that flag, or variations of it. It brought them comfort, or so I'm told. It signaled to the world that these colonies considered themselves a nation. It dared the British to acknowledge us as something more than rebellious children. I recall a letter I received from my brother, who fought with the Continental Army. He wrote that seeing the new flag flutter above the encampment gave the men courage. It reminded them that they were not just a ragtag group of rebels, they were Americans. That letter moved me deeply. Could our handiwork really have such power? Could the thread and cloth we stitched under candlelight change how men saw themselves? If so, then perhaps Betsy and I had done more than just sew a piece of fabric. Perhaps we had given them a story to believe in. Now, with time's passage, I realize that the truth of who created the first American flag will be contested. Some will say it was Francis Hopkinson, who submitted bills to Congress requesting payment for his design. Others will say it was the collective effort of many. But here, in these pages of my diary, I bear witness to what I saw, Betsy Ross, needle in hand, shaping a piece of cloth into an enduring symbol. I saw her skill and ingenuity. I saw her calm acceptance of a monumental task. I saw her pass that legacy on to me, a humble apprentice, who dared to dream that a free nation might be stitched into existence. I think of future generations, standing under that same flag, hand on heart, voices raised in anthem. They will have their own struggles, their own battles. They will look up at the stars and stripes, perhaps never knowing the cramped little room where it all began, never hearing the soft conversation between a seamstress and her helper. But that is how legends grow, like patches of bright fabric sewn into a quilt of memory. As I finish this entry, the candle is nearly spent. Dawn light now filters through the windowpane. The world outside stirs. I hear carriages rumbling over cobblestone streets, and the faint sound of a town crier somewhere in the distance. Life goes on. Our flag, no longer ours alone, belongs to a budding nation. I do not know what tomorrow will bring. Perhaps we will be free. Perhaps the Republic will endure. Perhaps this symbol we have stitched will become known across the world as the flag of a free people, an emblem of liberty. In my heart, I believe it will. And if someday someone finds these pages, someone far beyond my time, know that I was there. Know that a young seamstress's helper watched history unfold in quiet, determined stitches. Know that Betsy Ross was real, and that, in my eyes, she embodied the very spirit that banner sought to represent. I set my quill down, and I feel that I have done all I can to preserve this memory. I have turned common thread into words, just as Betsy turned words into symbols. Let the future say what it will. My testimony lies here, between pen and page. I have told my truth. I close the diary now, and with it, close my eyes. The first American flag is out in the world, and I have seen its birth. May it wave bravely in winds of change and stand for hope when hope is needed most.